Joining me now for some analysis of our latest Talk Business and Politics-Hendrix College poll results, Dr. Jay Barth, Emeritus Professor of Politics at Hendrix College, Robert Coon, Managing Partner of Impact Management Group. Always good to have you guys together on camera. We do plenty of talking by email. Thanks for being here, fellas.
Thanks, Robert.
Let's begin with the U.S. Senate primary on the Republican side. Perhaps one of our more intriguing results here. We've got John Boozman sitting at 45%. Jake Beckett, sometimes known as Jack Beckett, at 19%, 16.5% for Jan Morgan, 1.5%. Heath Loftus, undecided, 18%. Robert Coon, I will come to you first, as this is a Republican primary here. Is John Boozman going to get over 50%? Does Jake Beckett have a legitimate gripe?
I think John Boozman is likely to get over 50%. If it's sitting at 45, if you look at what's left in the undecideds, he just is a hop, skip, and a jump from getting there. I think this kind of incumbent feel has been out in the Republican primary for a number of cycles, back when Jan Morgan ran against Asa Hutchinson and even Curtis Coleman against John Boozman several years ago. It's never really gotten more than 25, 30%. I think we're probably going to see it get a little higher this time. It's hard for me to see that group get more than 50%.
And Beckett, does he have a legitimate gripe about his name being wrong on a couple of ballots in some counties around the state?
Well, I think anytime there's a mistake like that, you have a gripe. I think it's legitimate in those counties and with those county officials where the mistake was made. I think clearly the Secretary of State's office and the Attorney General, who he both kind of brought into this deal claiming voter fraud, I think that was just, that sensationalism tries to get you a little bit more media coverage. I mean, I think legitimate claim in the counties where it's happened, but it's certainly not the responsibility of the people that he called out.
All right, Jay Barth, what's your take on the Senate Republican primary there? Tell me what you expect to happen on Election Day.
Yeah, I do think Senator Boozman's going to get over 50%, probably not a lot over, and he has had to work really hard and spent a lot of money to get there. And I do think that shows an atmosphere that was always challenging for him. We saw that back in polling, in his unfavorables, months ago, and we were I think wary about his primary standing, but things have turned out about as expected, as he's been able to find a way to probably eke it out. But he's a weak candidate, but he's about to be a weak three-term senator because he is going to clearly win in the fall after he gets through this primary. So I think that's where things are right now. I do think the battle for second place, a lot of money's been spent on Beckett's behalf as well, and he may not finish second. And I think that does show some kind of grassroots support out there for Jan Morgan. And if the turnout is really, really low, which I think it is going to be very low, then I could see a grassroots candidate really kind of overperforming in a very small electorate.
All right, let's go to the Democrats for the U.S. Senate. Natalie James, 17, Dan Whitfield, 15, Jack Foster, 5, 63% undecided. Jay, I'll let you go first as you're the Democrat here. Who's going to be the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate? Undecided can't win that race.
Yeah, it's not Nevada, which does allow none of the above to win elections. It's very unclear. I mean, it's really just a coin flip of an election, and there's just really not much knowledge because none of these candidates have the resources to actually reach out to voters and explain who they are, much less what they stand for. And so it really does become down to just some name recognition, limited name recognition. Dan Whitfield may have a little bit of an advantage there, and that his name has been out there in political circles for a while. But I think Natalie James has an advantage as a Black candidate and as a woman in a disproportionately female electorate on the Democratic side. But sadly, whoever wins this thing it's going to be probably a pretty brutal fall with the incumbent senator likely to prevail pretty soundly.
All right, Robert Coon, who do the Republicans want in that Senate, out of that Senate primary? Are they licking their chops for one or the other or the other?
I don't think it really matters. I think whoever the Republican candidate is gonna win that election in November. I tend to think that Jay's point about a more female electorate probably leans towards Natalie in that race, just because the Democratic primary more so even than the overall electorate kind of trends more female. So maybe give her the edge on that. But I do think it's probably a toss up.
All right, I'm going to pull these next two responses together into one question here. We've got Sarah Huckabee Sanders running away with the Republican primary in our polling, over 72%. Same thing for Chris Jones on the Democratic side. He's pushing 60% on there. Clearly, it's going to set up a Chris Jones versus Sarah Huckabee general election. Robert, I'll come to you first on this. What did you see in those numbers for Sarah Huckabee? What did you see in those numbers for Chris Jones?
Well, I think they're clearly the front runner. Sarah Huckabee Sanders' numbers amongst Republicans are, astronomical. I mean, they're very similar in a lot of ways, both in this survey and other surveys I've seen to Donald Trump's numbers when it comes to self-identified Republicans. And she even is, generally supported and seen as favorable amongst independents that vote Republican. So, she's definitely built to win this primary. I think she's definitely the front runner, in the general election. Chris Jones has, really the only candidate to emerge on the Democratic side that has any base of support. I don't think any of the other candidates in the poll were above 5%. So I mean, he is the only one with the resources, the only one that has generated some name ID. That being said, in a general electorate, I mean, he's still by far, the underdog in that race. I think he's a smart, talented person. We'll see what kind of campaign they can put together, but definitely, going to be playing from behind.
Jay, I'll get your take on that same question for Robert, but also give me a little perspective on the historical context here. The winner, if it turns out to be Sarah Huckabee Sanders is on the R side, Chris Jones on the D side, Arkansas is going to make history in their next governor, no matter what, African-American candidate or female candidate.
Yeah, I mean, Arkansas has not had an elected statewide official who's African-American in its history. There were a couple of appointees back in the Reconstruction era. And then, of course, never a woman elected governor, although women have been elected statewide to the U.S. Senate and a number of other races. So this is a historic race. I do think that Chris Jones gets a lot of credit for really coalescing Democratic support quite well. He was not that well known among Democrats just 8 or 9 months ago. I do think that opener ad that went viral really put him on the map very quickly and just kind of coalesce support. He has had some fundraising success, but he is certainly going to be outgunned pretty significantly. I think they were hoping there would be more national investment in that race by national Democrats wanting to beat Sarah Huckabee Sanders, but there's so much going on, and defense and Democrats are having to play defense in so many places in the country. It really hasn't worked out that way so far. He's going to need some polling in the coming months that shows there's a sliver of a chance to get him back on the map.
All right, let's turn our attention to the lieutenant governor's race on the Republican side. The Democrats have already selected their nominee. It'll be Kelly Kraut on that one. She's the only one that filed. But in the lieutenant governor's race, it's iffy if we go to a runoff or if Leslie Rutledge, the front runner in our poll, can win without a runoff. I'm inclined to think that this thing still goes runoff. I think that a lot of those undecideds are going to have to break in her favor to go that way. She's at 40%. Senator Jason Rapert at 11%. Dr. Greg Bledsoe, the Surgeon General, at 8.5%. And then you can go through the rest of the list there. Robert, I'll come to you first on this. What do you think happens on election day? Does Leslie Rutledge get over that 50% hurdle? And if not, what does a runoff election look like in the Republican primary?
I think it's really tough for her to get there. And, I know that Senator Bozeman was around 45, and I think, Leslie Rutledge is somewhere around 40 or 41, and that doesn't seem that far apart. But I think when you have as many candidates in that race, it just gives voters that are undecided so many more options other than the one, right? Your odds just kind of diminish. I think she could get close to 50. She could get it. I would suspect that she's probably held under 50. With either Jason Rapert or Greg Bledsoe pulling in second. I think Chris Beckett obviously is got another relative on the ballot with the same last name, and he has said he's put a bunch of money in. I don't know that that money has been spent. I think that's a question mark. I don't want to discount that could move people in the last couple of weeks, but if it's actually on the airwaves. But I think you're looking at Jason Rayford or Greg Bledsoe, eking into a runoff there and having an uphill climb. And, I don't know if they're going to exhaust all their resources to get there.
Jay, what are runoff politics for Republicans or Democrats in this day and age? What could you see happening in terms of 3 weeks after Election Day on May 24th? We're still trying to figure out who the Republican lieutenant governor nominee is going to be.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of history with Republican runoffs in higher profile races. Leslie Rutledge, actually one of the most significant one, probably her first race for Attorney General, did go to a runoff. Turnout was then very, very small. Really a special election type situation. I think that it would be a little better this time because there's going to be Republican races around the state at the local level in a way there was not just a few cycles ago. But it will be a very small electorate, and I think that probably does favor the second place candidate, especially if it's a Rayford or a Beckett, somebody who's more of a grassroots type candidate. I think a race against Bledsoe is probably a different beast because he's really pulling from a more kind of traditional country club conservative type voter as much as they exist anymore in the state. I do think that the Rutledge campaign probably did miss an opportunity about a month ago to go ahead and make a bigger investment in the primary, and they probably could have gotten more sure of getting over the hump. And I think that it's always in politics. Of course, you second guess what should have happened a month ago, but that's what this feels like these results do. So she's in solid shape. I mean, I think the odds are there's an old rule of thumb is that if you get 40% and you got it in the first round and you got a 5-point lead going in the runoff, you generally win the runoff. We'll see if that holds, but she looks like she's going to, be in a spot where she's going to be a very, very, very strong favorite in a runoff, as unpredictable as they get with small turnouts.
Yeah, that is one of the races I am watching very closely on election night, just because of we haven't seen that type of race in a Republican primary. Those candidates, as Robert alluded to, are in so many different lanes. There's so many choices. I think that's going to give us a good read on where Republican primary voters are, and just when you look at the candidates that kind of and the placement that they come in. All right, lastly, Jay first, Robert last. We got 2 Supreme Court races on the ballot, position 2, position 6. The 2 incumbents lead, but huge unknowns in that race. Is there a chance that we see some sort of upset in terms of taking out an incumbent Supreme Court justice in either one of those races, Jay?
I think that Justice Karen Baker is in stronger shape. She's in a 2-person race. She's in stronger shape. She's got a higher percentage, although it's still in the 30s, low 30s, and so she's got a ways away from getting to the majority. But I do think she has advantages as a woman candidate. We've seen good success for female candidates in Supreme Court and other judicial races recently, and I think she's probably got a really solid chance. That said, this is going to be a disproportionately Republican electorate. And, in all these races, the candidates running against the incumbents, they all have Republican bona fides, including Judge Gunnar DeLay, who's running against her. And so I do think that there's a shot of an upset there. I think on the other side, in all likelihood, we're headed to a runoff. Judge Robin Wynn, Judge Carnahan Chris Carnahan's in second. He is certainly the favorite to get into that runoff. That's going to be that would of course take place in November. That's a whole different beast. I think that it's very hard to see Wynn getting to 50% with 2 strong candidates in a Republican dominated electorate. All
right, Robert Coon, the last word goes to you.
Well, I tend to think that in both of these races, voters really are just not familiar with anybody. Their name IDs really just aren't that high. I think the ballot title then becomes really the dynamic that pushes people one direction. I think that benefits Karen Baker, that benefits Robin Wynn. I think if you look back at the last couple of cycles, it's really been kind of that outside money that's come in these Supreme Court races that has been the dominant amount of money. I don't know that any of these candidates in either race have really raised and or spent significant dollars to raise their profile. I mean, I know they're doing some mail and some other things, but not at the level of spending that you really need to move voters on a mass scale. And I think that, you know, apart from that, I think ballot title becomes a big issue. I agree with Jay. I think that you have candidates in the race that kind of have those, you know, that Republican background that they are leaning on. But if you can't get the message out about it, it doesn't do you any good, right? It has to be burned into the voters to know which person to vote for. And I just don't think the resources are there. I do think, you know, if the race with Robin Wynn and Chris Carnahan and David Sterling were to go to runoff, maybe you see some outside money come in at that point. But, you know, we haven't seen it yet. And maybe there's just lack of an appetite there. But, you know, I think it's possible with 3 people with such a large undecided, nobody really carrying the ballot, that one does go to a runoff.
Yeah. All right. This is going to be what we call a reset election, the primary and the general election. We've redrawn legislative lines. We've redrawn congressional lines. So we're going to see how some of these new districts kind of play out. We'll get a little bit of a feel for that on May 24th. Robert Coon, Jay Barth, as always, appreciate your insights. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks.